What if your royal selfie defined an era? How did a queen's choice of a sleeve or a veil become the hottest look for an entire kingdom from the 5th to the 15th century? Number 11. Direct personal style and royal wardrobe. From the grand halls of Westminster to the sun-drenched courtyards of Palermo, medieval queens did not merely exist within their elaborate castles. They were living canvases, their every garment a declaration. Their personal style, meticulously chosen and often custom-made, rippled through the courts and beyond, setting trends that commoners and nobles alike eagerly observed. Queen's wardrobe was more than just clothing. It was a carefully curated collection, often the most expensive and varied in the realm. A potent symbol of power and wealth, one of the most captivating figures to wield this silent sartorial influence was Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman who reigned as Queen of France and later Queen of England in the 12th century. Her approach to fashion was strikingly different from the rigid styles often seen in other courts. Eleanor, with her vibrant personality, favored elegant yet less restrictive silhouettes. While many noble women of her time adopted the tight lacing and stiff wimples that concealed much of the hair, Eleanor was often depicted and described as wearing her long golden hair flowing freely, perhaps adorned with a simple circlet or a delicate net. Contemporary accounts, such as those from the Chronicle of Richard of Devizes, mention her striking appearance, hinting at her distinctive choices. Her preferred gowns, often called cotardes, were cut with a certain ease, allowing for graceful movement. These garments, made from fine silks and rich velvets, often showcased the natural drape of the fabric, rather than forcing it into severe lines. Her influence extended to the length of her sleeves, which, though long, avoided the extreme trailing forms that some earlier styles adopted. Her appearances at courtly gatherings and tournaments, recorded in the detailed records of the royal household, show her consistently favoring this more relaxed yet undeniably opulent style. Ladies across England and France, noticing the Queen's embrace of less severe head coverings and flowing dresses, began to emulate her. Merchants and tailors in cities like London and Paris started to offer similar styles, catering to a burgeoning demand for the Eleanor look. The sight of Eleanor in her flowing garments, often adorned with subtle embroidery rather than overt jewels on the dress itself, provided a powerful visual lesson. Her style underscored a growing appreciation for comfort combined with luxury, a delicate balance that few figures managed to strike as effectively. This was not a trend dictated by decree, but rather by pure undeniable visual appeal. Another powerful figure, Isabella of France, Queen of England in the early 14th century, showcased a different kind of direct influence, known as the She-Wolf of France. Isabella was a woman of immense political acumen and a keen eye for fashion. Her arrival in England brought with it the refined, often more intricate, French court styles. Isabella was particularly influential in popularizing elaborate headwear. While simple veils and wimples had been common, Isabella introduced and championed the crispinet and the caul-ornate nets and decorative enclosures for the hair. These often involved intricate gold or silver netting, sometimes studded with pearls and gemstones designed to contain the hair in elegant side buns or coils above the ears. These forms of headwear became incredibly popular, appearing in countless effigies and illustrations of noblewomen from the period. Royal wardrobe accounts, detailing the purchases of vast quantities of silk thread, pearls, and gold wire, attest to the sheer volume of such accessories produced for the Queen and her ladies-in-waiting. Isabella's adoption of these complex head coverings transformed the silhouette of the noblewoman, drawing attention to the face and the artistry of the coiffure. The chronicler Jean Froissart, in his extensive accounts of the period, often noted the splendor of the English court, with particular emphasis on the ladies' elaborate headwear, directly linking it to the French styles introduced by Queen Isabella. The influence was undeniable. What the Queen wore particularly on her head, quickly became the aspirational style for other ladies of the court. Filtering down to the wealthy merchant classes who sought to imitate royal elegance. Her preferences also extended to the fashion of the cotardie, a fitted gown which she wore with a distinct emphasis on a slender waist, achieved through careful tailoring and lacing. This tight-fitting garment, often with long, narrow sleeves, accentuated the figure, and Isabella's consistent choice of this style reinforced its popularity across the courts of Europe. Her personal choice became a visual standard, adopted by ladies striving for the pinnacle of contemporary elegance. Blanche of Castile, who served as Queen of France in the 13th century and later as regent, exemplified a more understated, yet equally powerful influence through her personal style. Known for her piety and administrative skills, Blanche's fashion choices reflected a refined elegance that became synonymous with the French court. She favored rich, but not overly ostentatious, fabrics, often choosing deep blues, regal reds, and forest greens. Her preferred style was the bleu, a long flowing tunic often worn over a chemise, sometimes with very wide decorative sleeves that were often slit to reveal the chemise. While less dramatically inimitable than Eleanor's free hair or Isabella's elaborate headwear, Blanche's consistent promotion of modesty, combined with opulent materials, set a standard. Her personal style became a template for what was considered appropriate and elegant for a pious queen. Accounts from the Chronique de Saint-Denis describe her as always impeccably dressed, her clothing speaking to her dignity and status rather than mere trend-setting. She often wore a wimple and veil, symbols of modesty, but hers were often made from the finest, sheerest linen or silk, carefully draped and pinned to frame her face perfectly. Her patronage of Parisian tailors meant that her specific preferences in cut and fit were meticulously executed, creating garments that were both graceful and impressive. These detailed patterns, once established for the queen, would then be adopted by other ladies who sought to retaliate the refined grandeur of the French court. Quiet authority of her choices, consistently elegant and appropriate, provided a steady bedrock for French fashion, promoting a timeless style that transcended fleeting fads and cemented the idea that a queen's personal expression was a powerful engine of aesthetic change. Number 10. Influence through royal ceremonies and court spectacles. Medieval royal courts were not just centers of power. They were stages for elaborate spectacles, from grand coronations and diplomatic receptions to glittering tournaments and sumptuous feasts. Queens as the central female figures in these events played a crucial role in setting the tone for ceremonial attire, displaying the absolute pinnacle of current fashion, and influencing what was considered appropriate and magnificent for high-status gatherings. Their ceremonial dress was meticulously planned, often months in advance, involving the finest materials, skilled artisans, and immense financial resources. One of the most spectacular examples of a queen shaping fashion through ceremonial display comes from Isabella of Bavaria, Queen of France in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Isabella was renowned for her love of luxury and her extravagant court, which was a constant source of both admiration and criticism. Her coronation in 1389 was an unprecedented display of opulence, setting a new standard for royal grandeur. For this event, Isabella wore a gown so magnificent it was described by chroniclers as shimmering with gold and jewels. The train held by noble pages, she popularized the hennin, a tall, conical headdress that became iconic of the late medieval period. While variations of tall hats existed before Isabella's embrace and consistent use of the hennin, often soaring to impressive heights and adorned with sheer veils that cascaded down, transformed it into the ultimate symbol of aristocratic female fashion. Records from the French royal treasury detail vast expenditures on silk, velvet, ermine, and precious stones for her ceremonial gowns and headwear. Her hinens were not mere accessories. They were architectural marvels, sometimes reaching over a meter in height, requiring careful balance and often causing their wearers to have to stoop to pass through doorways. The impact of Isabella's ceremonial appearances was immense. Every major event she attended, from the Feast of the Pheasant in Lille to the entry of King Charles VI into Paris, saw her in breathtaking ensembles. The Chronique de Froissart lavishly describe her attire, noting the richness of her fabrics and the daring height of her hinens. Other noblewomen, eager to emulate the Queen's prestige, quickly adopted these elaborate head coverings, often going to great lengths to achieve the same dramatic effect. Court painters and miniaturists, tasked with depicting these grand occasions, further immortalized Isabella's influence, ensuring her extravagant styles were widely seen and copied. The hinen, driven by her example, became a defining silhouette for courtly ladies across Burgundy, France, and beyond, a clear indicator of social standing and high fashion. Another queen who used ceremonial appearances to influence fashion was Philippa of Hainaut, Queen of England in the 14th century. While perhaps less overtly extravagant than Isabella of Bavaria, Philippa's influence came from her dignified presence and her consistent adoption of the houppelande for grand occasions. The houppelande was a versatile outer garment, initially appearing for men, but quickly adapted for women. Philippa's versions for ceremonial use were particularly magnificent. These gowns were typically full-length with voluminous sleeves that often touched the floor or even trailed behind. The sleeves were sometimes dagged or cut into elaborate shapes, lined with contrasting colors or expensive furs like miniver or ermine. The houppelande was often belted high under the bust, creating a long flowing silhouette. Philippa's appearances at royal tournaments, recorded in the wardrobe accounts of Edward III, show her wearing houppelandes crafty from rich velvets and brocades, often embroidered with heraldic devices. Her consistent choice for these public high-profile events solidified the houppelande as the ultimate garment for formal courtly wear for both men and women. The flowing lines and generous cut conveyed a sense of wealth and leisure, perfectly suited to the spectacle of royal gatherings. Ladies of the court and aspiring gentry quickly adopted the houppelande, recognizing it as the quintessential garment for display and status. The sheer volume of fabric required for these gowns also made them an overt statement of wealth, a concept powerfully reinforced by the Queen's own lavish examples. The houppelande, as demonstrated by Philippa, became a testament to the fact that ceremonial dress was not just about conforming to protocol, but about dictating the very aesthetics of courtly magnificence. Furthermore, queens' roles in royal weddings, such as the grand marriage of Margaret of York to Charles the Bold in 1468, showcased how entire ensembles for courtly functions could become trend-setting. Margaret's wedding gown, though primarily influenced by Burgundian fashion, was so lavish and widely depicted that it set a new benchmark for bridal and festive attire. While not a queen at the time of this specific event, her later influence as Duchess of Burgundy meant that the styles she championed continued to impact royal fashion. The elaborate houppelande, with its deeply scooped neckline revealing a jeweled partelet, the complex butterfly headdress, and the intricate embroidery on her garments were seen by countless dignitaries and later depicted in countless illuminations. These high-profile events served as fashion shows, where the Queen was the undisputed star. Her choices in fabrics, the specific cuts of her garments, the height of her headdresses, and the sparkle of her jewels were not merely personal preferences. They were prescriptive. They showed everyone what was current, what was expensive, and what was truly royal. The sheer visual impact of a queen arrayed in her finest for a ceremonial event reverberated through society, driving demand for similar styles and confirming her position as the ultimate arbiter of courtly elegance. Number 9. Patronage of crafts and artisans. Beyond simply wearing fashionable clothes, medieval queens actively shaped trends by becoming powerful patrons of the era's most skilled artisans. Their direct commissions to jewelers, embroiderers, furriers, and tailors stimulated innovation, refined techniques, and often dictated the very quality and availability of luxury goods. Queen's endorsement, often backed by immense financial resources, could elevate a craftsman's reputation, establish new workshops, and propagate specific styles that would then be eagerly adopted by the wider nobility. One significant example is Eleanor of Provence, Queen of England in the 13th century. Eleanor was known for her love of luxury and her discerning taste. She brought with her from her native Provence a strong appreciation for fine craftsmanship, particularly in the realm of embroidery and ecclesiastical vestments. Her patronage was instrumental in fostering a distinct English style of embroidery known as opus Anglicanum, a highly prized art form recognized across Europe. Eleanor regularly commissioned elaborate garments and liturgical textiles, often featuring intricate needlework with gold and silver threads, pearls, and precious stones. Records from the pipe rolls and wardrobe accounts of Henry III frequently mention payments to embroiderers for the Queen's personal attire, as well as for gifts she presented to other royals or religious institutions. These commissions often specified particular motifs, heraldic devices, religious scenes, or intricate floral patterns which then became popular. The sheer volume and complexity of the work she commissioned pushed the boundaries of the art form, leading to incredibly detailed and visually stunning pieces. Other noblewomen, seeing the Queen's magnificent embroidered garments, naturally sought to have similar work done for their own wardrobes. This demand directly supported the growth of skilled embroidery workshops, particularly in London, making opus Anglicanum a sought-after luxury. Eleanor's direct financial support and her insistence on the highest quality ensured that this art form flourished, influencing the decorative elements seen on everything from courtly robes to smaller accessories. Like purses, her patronage was a vital engine driving not just the creation of beautiful individual pieces, but also the establishment of a specific artistic trend that became a hallmark of English luxury fashion. Another queen who profoundly influenced fashion through her patronage was Elizabeth of Luxembourg, Holy Roman Empress and Queen of Hungary and Bohemia in the early 15th century. Elizabeth was a great collector of jewels and precious objects, and her love for elaborate adornment directly influenced the work of goldsmiths and jewelers. She commissioned stunning pieces of jewelry, including intricate gold chains, elaborate brooches known as fur mails, and jeweled belts that were often worn high on the waist over houppelans. These pieces were not only expensive but also set trends in design. For instance, her preference for settings that allowed gemstones to truly sparkle, or for complex filigree work, became a benchmark. The inventory of her jewels, a detailed list of her possessions, reveals an astonishing collection of rings, necklaces, and pendants, many of which were likely custom-made. These items served as focal points of her attire, often enhancing the neckline or the waist of her gowns. Her frequent appearances at court functions adorned with these magnificent pieces inspired other noblewomen to invest in similar high-quality, elaborate jewelry. Jewelers across the Holy Roman Empire and Bohemia would then offer designs that echoed the styles favored by the Empress, turning her personal preference into a widespread demand. The sheer craftsmanship involved in creating these pieces meant that her patronage not only drove the market for precious metals and stones, but also honed the skills of the artisans themselves, leading to more refined and innovative designs in fine jewelry. Even in the realm of fabrics, queens exercised immense influence through their patronage. Isabella of Castile, the powerful Queen of Spain in the late 15th century, played a significant role in promoting the use of luxurious textiles, particularly silks and velvets, within her court. While these fabrics were imported, Isabella's consistent demand for the finest qualities and her commissioning of garments from specific weavers and merchants solidified their status as essential elements of royal attire. Her wardrobe accounts detail large purchases of Florentine velvets, Genoese silks, and brocades woven with gold and silver threads. Her patronage spurred trade routes and encouraged the production of increasingly sophisticated textile designs. The elaborate patterns seen on her garments, often featuring pomegranates, thistles, or other symbolic motifs, became highly desirable. By consistently choosing specific types and qualities of fabrics for her gowns, her houppelans, and even her church vestments, Isabella set a clear standard for opulence. Her example led other Spanish nobles to seek out similar expensive fabrics, ensuring that the Queen's personal preferences directly impacted the textile market and the wealth of the merchants and artisans who supplied these luxurious materials. Through their financial power and discerning taste, medieval queens were not just consumers of fashion. They were catalysts for its evolution, driving the very industries that created the dazzling garments and accessories of their age. Number 8. Diplomacy and international exchange of fashion. Royal marriages in the medieval period were rarely affairs of the heart. They were strategic alliances, binding kingdoms together. When a princess from one realm married into the royal family of another, she did more than just bring a dowry. She often brought her native culture, customs, and crucially her fashion sense. These royal brides became powerful agents of cultural exchange, introducing new styles, materials, and silhouettes from their homelands to their adopted courts, profoundly influencing local fashion trends. One prime example of this cross-cultural fashion transfer is Anne of Bohemia, who became Queen of England through her marriage to King Richard II in 1382. Anne arrived in England from a highly sophisticated Central European court, bringing with her a distinct style that was different from the prevailing English fashion. Her influence was particularly notable in her preference for gowns with high necklines and long full sleeves, often described as bag sleeves or poke sleeves, which were wider at the shoulder and tapered to a narrow wrist. These sleeves were often so long they had to be gathered up on the forearm, creating a graceful drape. The chronicler, Thomas Walsingham, though at times critical, nonetheless noted the visual impact of her arrival. Anne also championed a particular form of elaborate headwear that incorporated jeweled fillets and intricate veils. Her personal wardrobe, meticulously documented in the issue rolls of the Exchequer, included various garments made in the Bohemian style, emphasizing certain cuts and embellishments. Her presence at court immediately introduced these new silhouettes and decorative elements. English ladies, eager to emulate their young queen, began to adopt these styles, transforming the English courtly aesthetic. Tailors in London and across England quickly learned to adapt their patterns to cater to this new demand, offering garments with these specific sleeve types and more elaborate head coverings. Anne's influence also extended to accessories. She was fond of intricate goldsmith work, which encouraged a greater demand for detailed jewelry among the English nobility. Her journey across Europe and her subsequent life at the English court served as a conduit for fashion ideas, making her an accidental ambassador of Bohemian chic to a traditionally more conservative English court. The sheer visibility of the Queen, embodying a new style, was enough to ignite a widespread adoption among the aristocracy. Another powerful example is Catherine of Valois, who became Queen of England upon her marriage to King Henry V in 1420. Catherine brought with her the refined and elegant styles of the French court, which at the time were at the forefront of European fashion. French fashion, particularly that of the Burgundian court, which significantly influenced French styles, was known for its extravagance in materials and its inimitous silhouettes. Catherine introduced to the English court a heightened appreciation for voluminous gowns, often featuring deep necklines and exaggerated wide sleeves, as well as the fashionable hennin headdress, which had already taken root in France. While hennins were already making inroads in England, Catherine's consistent use of the grandest, tallest versions, sometimes adorned with flowing veils of sheer silk, accelerated their popularity among the English nobility. Records from the Great Wardrobe accounts detail the acquisition of vast quantities of silk, velvet, and cloth of gold for Catherine's gowns, reflecting the French taste for rich, luxurious fabrics. Her presence at royal ceremonies and public events, where she was impeccably dressed in the latest French styles, provided a compelling visual model for other English ladies. The Chronicles of London occasionally refer to the Queen's splendor, often implying the French origins of her magnificent attire. The exchange was not one way, however. English styles, though often perceived as simpler, also made their way back to France through English noblewomen who accompanied Catherine or who traveled between the two courts. However, Catherine's dominant influence was in solidifying French trends, demonstrating how royal marriages served as direct pipelines for transnational fashion. Mas. Her personal preference, rooted in her homeland's aesthetic, became the aspirational standard for her adopted country. Even earlier, Theophanu, an empress of the Holy Roman Empire, in the late 10th century, a Byzantine princess, brought with her the sophisticated, luxurious, and often jeweled fashions of Constantinople. Byzantine fashion was famed for its rich silks, often woven with gold thread, intricate embroidery, and liberal use of precious stones. Theophanu's arrival in Germany, as documented by contemporary chroniclers like Dietmar of Merseburg, marked a significant shift in courtly dress. She wore gowns adorned with elaborate jeweled bands and patterned silks that were a stark contrast to the simpler, more Germanic styles prevalent at the time. Her preference for tunics and cloaks of unparalleled richness, often trimmed with gold braids and pearls, set a new standard for imperial grandeur. Her personal style encouraged the use of more opulent materials and intricate ornamentation among the German nobility. The influence of Byzantine textile arts and jewelry designs, as exemplified by Theophanu's wardrobe, permeated the imperial court, leading to a greater demand for imported silks and for local artisans to emulate the intricate Byzantine designs. Her diplomatic role was intrinsically linked with her sartorial choices, presenting the wealth and sophistication of the Byzantine Empire through her dress. Thus, royal marriages were not merely political acts. They were fashion conduits, with queens serving as the living advertisements for the styles of their distant homelands, forever altering the sartorial landscape of their new kingdoms. Number 7. Mourning customs and royal protocol. Mourning in the medieval period was a highly formalized affair, especially within royal courts. The death of a monarch, a spouse, or a significant family member triggered a strict protocol that dictated not only behavior, but also dress. Queens, as the widowed or grieving figures, played a crucial role in establishing and maintaining these mourning customs, their choices influencing not just the immediate court, but also setting precedents for future generations. Their adherence to specific somber attire, often for extended periods, solidified certain garments and colors as symbols of grief. One of the most profound examples of a queen shaping mourning fashion is Eleanor of Castile, Queen of England, following the death of her husband, King Edward I, in 1307. While black had long been a color associated with mourning, Eleanor's extended and highly visible period of widowhood solidified the practice of wearing simple, dark garments. Her grief was deeply felt, and she famously commissioned a series of elaborate Eleanor crosses, marking the resting places of her coffin on its journey to Westminster. Her personal attire during this period reflected a strict adherence to somberness. She was often depicted in simple dark wool or black gowns, with her head completely covered by a wimple and veil, leaving only her face exposed. Records from the royal wardrobe accounts confirm extensive purchases of dark cloths for the queen and her household during this mourning period. This rigorous adherence to a stark, unadorned mourning dress, seen consistently in her public appearances and portraits, profoundly influenced the expectations for royal widowhood and aristocratic mourning. The simplicity of her dark garments, in stark contrast to the usual vibrant colors and elaborate embellishments of court dress, made a powerful visual statement about sorrow and respect. Other noble women, observing the queen's dignified and consistent mourning attire, began to adopt similar practices for their own periods of grief, choosing dark, unadorned gowns and modest head coverings. This solidified black and dark colors as the definitive palette for mourning, a trend that would persist for centuries. Another queen whose mourning attire had a lasting impact was Joan of Navarre, Queen of England, after the death of her husband, King Henry IV. In 1413, like Eleanor of Castile, Joan adopted a somber, unadorned wardrobe. However, her influence also lay in the specific forms of her mourning headwear. For a significant period following the king's death, Joan was seen in public wearing a black hooded mantle that completely enveloped her head and body, allowing only glimpses of her face. This mantle was often made of dark wool or heavy silk, signifying profound grief and seclusion. Detailed accounts from her wardrobe show purchases for these specific mourning mantles and veils. Her consistent use of this distinct, enveloping mourning attire created a powerful visual representation of widowhood. It was a clear departure from the more elaborate, often jeweled headwear common in court. The hooded mantle became a recognized symbol of deep mourning, particularly for royal widows, and its adoption by the queen provided a strong precedent. Ladies of the court and other high-ranking widows began to wear similar, though perhaps less grand versions of this enveloping headwear and dark garments. Joan's dignified adherence to these specific mourning traditions helped to formalize and spread the adoption of particular garments for periods of intense grief within the English aristocracy. Even in periods of early medieval history, queens set precedents for mourning. For instance, the descriptions of queens and noblewomen in Carolingian and Ottonian eras indicate a general shift towards unbleached or dark linens and simpler cloaks. During mourning periods, while black was not universally codified as the sole mourning color until later centuries, the act of a queen eschewing her usual opulent attire for something simpler and more somber during times of grief set a fundamental pattern. Accounts like those found in the Annals Xantenses occasionally reference queens adopting simpler garments during times of national or personal sorrow. This royal example served as a powerful nonverbal communication about appropriate conduct during periods of loss. Queen, by conspicuously adopting a specific dress code for mourning, underscored the solemnity of the occasion and provided a visual guide for how the court and, by extension, the realm, should outwardly express its grief. These royal mourning traditions, established by queens over centuries, formed the bedrock of later, elaborate mourning protocols, making their choices in somber attire a lasting influence on fashion and social conduct. Number 6. Religious piety and modesty. In the deeply religious medieval world, queens often played a crucial role in shaping fashion. Trends, through their personal expressions of piety and modesty, their choices in clothing, particularly when they sought to emulate the virtues of saints or to demonstrate their devotion, influenced courtly etiquette and set a standard for appropriate attire. This could manifest in simpler garments, specific head coverings, or a general rejection of excessive ornamentation, all of which had a trickle-down effect on the fashion choices of noblewomen. One of the most compelling examples is Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, a 13th century princess and later queen who famously embraced a life of austerity and charity. While born into royalty, Elizabeth's deep religious convictions led her to reject the extravagance common at court. She famously preferred simple, unadorned wool or linen gowns, often of natural colors, in stark contrast to the vibrant silks, velvets, and elaborate jewels favored by her peers. Biographers like Conrad of Marburg recounted her dedication to helping the poor and her disdain for worldly luxury, describing her as often wearing a coarse tunic beneath her modest outer garments. Her head was always covered with a simple veil, often of plain white linen, eschewing the jeweled fillets and elaborate wimples common among noble women. Though her personal choices were driven by spiritual humility, they created a powerful visual statement. While other queens flaunted their wealth through their dress, Elizabeth's voluntary simplicity was a radical act. Her fame for piety, which led to her canonization, meant that her image as a humble queen resonated deeply. For some noble women, particularly those with strong religious inclinations, Elizabeth's example offered a different path. It provided a precedent for dressing with modesty and purpose even within the confines of aristocratic life. This influence might not have sparked a widespread fashion revolution in terms of cut or material, but it certainly promoted an appreciation for understated elegance and the idea that true nobility was not solely expressed through ostentatious display. Her simple veil and unadorned gown became a symbol of her saintliness, inspiring other devout women to adopt more modest styles in their own daily wear, thus contributing to the broader fashion landscape by championing virtue over vanity. Another queen who influenced fashion through her piety was Blanche of Castile. Queen and later regent of France in the 13th century, Blanche was known for her strict moral code and her devout Catholicism. Her personal style, though still undeniably regal, consistently favored modesty and dignity over overt extravagance. While she certainly wore rich fabrics and colors befitting her station, her gowns were always cut with a certain sobriety. She favored the bleots and cotards that were well-fitting but not overly revealing. Crucially, Blanche always maintained a fully covered head, typically with a carefully draped wimple and veil that concealed her hair completely and framed her face elegantly. Her insistence on this modest headwear set a strong example for the French court. Chroniclers, such as William of Nantes, often lauded her virtue and the appropriate decorum of her court. Blanche's unwavering commitment to modest dress, particularly in her headwear, reinforced the idea that proper, pious ladies should keep their hair entirely covered. This royal endorsement cemented the wimple and veil as essential components of respectable female attire, not just for married women but for all women past a certain age. Her influence ensured that, even as fashion evolved, the fundamental principle of a covered head remained deeply ingrained in the sartorial expectations for noble women in France, for centuries directly impacting the design and adoption of headwear styles. Even in later periods, queens used fashion to project piety. Eleanor of Aquitaine, despite her reputation for vibrancy, also understood the power of religious symbolism in dress. While she famously wore her hair uncovered in her youth, as she aged and particularly after her time spent in convent life, she was often depicted and described in more traditionally modest attire, including a wimple and veil during religious ceremonies or acts of public devotion. This shift, even for a queen known for her unconventional style, reinforced the societal expectation of modesty in specific contexts. Her later choices, often seen in illuminated manuscripts, show her in more conventional garments for a queen of her age and piety, demonstrating that even fashion icons could strategically adopt conservative styles to project virtue. By embodying and validating modest and pious dress through their own choices, these queens, whether by radical simplicity or consistent adherence to established norms, played a vital role in shaping what was considered appropriate and even aspirational. Their influence, driven by their faith, provided an alternative current to the prevailing winds of pure luxury and ostentation, ensuring that virtue had its own distinct style. Number 5. Innovation in headwear and hair ornamentation. From towering hennons to elaborate jeweled cauls, medieval queens were undisputed pioneers in the realm of headwear and hair ornamentation. Far more than mere accessories, these items were statements of status, marital status, and often the height of fashion. Queens, with their access to the finest materials and skilled artisans, experimented with and popularized head coverings and hair flows that fundamentally altered the female silhouette, becoming defining elements of specific eras. A groundbreaking queen in this regard was Isabella of Bavaria, Queen of France, in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, as previously mentioned, for her overall courtly spectacle. However, her specific impact on the hennin cannot be overstated. Before Isabella's enthusiastic adoption, tall headdresses existed, but her consistent and grand use of the hennin elevated it to an art form and a widespread trend. These conical headdresses, often reaching dizzying heights, were typically made from stiffened linen or buckram covered with rich silk or velvet. They were often topped with a sheer, flowing veil, sometimes so long it trailed behind the wearer, or draped elegantly around the face. Records from the French royal treasury reveal massive sums spent on the materials and construction of Isabella's hennins, including silk, gold, thread, pearls, and precious stones. Her preference for taller, more extravagant hennins spurred a craze across the French court and beyond. Noble women in Flanders, Burgundy, and even England quickly adopted variations of the hennin, which became a quintessential symbol of high aristocratic fashion of the late medieval period. The Grands Chroniques de France occasionally mention the awe inspired by the Queen's majestic appearance, implicitly including her striking headwear. Practicalities of such tall headdresses meant that doorways often had to be adapted, or wearers had to bend considerably, a testament to their dramatic impact and the commitment of their wearers. Isabella's public appearances, where her hennins stood out as architectural marvels, solidified this trend, transforming a daring fashion statement into a common expectation for courtly ladies. Another queen who profoundly influenced headwear was Anne of Bohemia, Queen of England in the late 14th century. Previously noted for her overall fashion influence, Anne's impact on headwear was subtle but significant. While the hennin emerged slightly later or in different forms, Anne championed more intricate, jeweled cauls and crispinets. These were fine nets, often made of gold or silver threads, sometimes studded with pearls and gemstones designed to encase the hair, often styled in elaborate coils or buns, positioned at the sides of the head or over the ears. These cauls sometimes had decorative elements that draped over the forehead or temple. The wardrobe accounts of Richard II detail numerous purchases of fine threads and jewels for creating these specific hair ornaments for the Queen. Anne's consistent use of these refined and sparkling hairnets provided a sophisticated alternative to simpler veils. It showcased the hair even while containing it, allowing for a glimpse of elegant coiffure. This trend of visible, ornate hair enclosures gained traction among the English nobility. Unlike the single dramatic hennin, the caul and crispinet offered versatility and allowed for intricate display of jewels and goldsmithing directly on the head. Her example made it acceptable and even fashionable for women to show elements of their hairstyle, albeit within an elaborate structure. Even earlier in the 12th century, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of France and England, despite her personal preference for sometimes wearing her hair uncovered, a bold influenced trends in subtle hair ornamentation. While she often appeared with flowing hair, she also popularized the use of simple circlets thin gold bands or delicate fillets adorned with small pearls or enameled elements. These were less about grand concealment and more about elegant enhancement. Her chroniclers, including Gerald of Wales, occasionally alluded to her elegant personal presentation, which often included subtle but exquisite adornment. These circlets, seen in various depictions of Eleanor, offered a graceful alternative to the heavier wimples or barbettes of earlier periods. They allowed the hair to remain visible while still providing a touch of royal dignity. Her influence encouraged other noblewomen to embrace simpler yet still luxurious forms of headwear, moving away from the more restrictive styles and embracing a more natural, albeit adorned, presentation. Each queen, through her unique preferences and powerful platform, thus pushed the boundaries of headwear design, turning what might seem like a small detail into a major fashion statement that defined eras and shaped the very appearance of medieval aristocracy. Number 4. The allure of the royal portrait. In an age before mass media, royal portraits were not just artistic renditions. They were powerful tools of propaganda and, crucially, fashion advertisements. Queens, through their carefully composed images, disseminated their style across kingdoms and even continents. These portraits, whether painted on panels, illuminated in manuscripts, or sculpted in stone, froze the queen in her most fashionable attire, allowing her sartorial choices to be admired, studied, and eagerly imitated by those who would never see her in person. One of the most able queens in this regard was Blanche of Castile, Queen of France in the 13th century. Her portraits, particularly those found in illuminated manuscripts like the Moralized Bible commissioned by her son Louis IX, are rich sources of information about her attire. These images, often showing her in her role as a regal and pious regent, consistently depicted her in elegant, modest, yet undeniably luxurious gowns. She is often seen wearing a cotehardie or pliot in deep, rich colors like blue or red, with sleeves that were well fitted and not excessively elaborate. Her head is always covered by a meticulously draped wimple and veil, sometimes with a simple circlet over the veil. The widespread circulation of such illuminated manuscripts, often presented as gifts to other noble houses and religious institutions, meant that Blanche's image, and thus her style, reached a broad and influential audience. The very act of portraying the queen in a specific garment lent that style an air of authority and desirability. Noblewomen seeing these images would note the queen's restrained elegance, the quality of her fabrics, and the refined lines of her dress. The consistent visual message from her portraits reinforced a standard of dignified and appropriate royal dress, one that balanced opulence with piety. This visual dissemination, far removed from fleeting court appearances, ensured that Blanche's preferred aesthetic became a lasting blueprint for noble female attire, a silent dictate on what was considered truly sophisticated. Another queen whose portraits played a crucial role in disseminating fashion was Isabella of France, Queen of England, in the early 14th century. While few dandelion-painted portraits survive from her time, her effigies, seals, and genealogical rolls, often featuring detailed depictions of her, were widely distributed. These images captured her preference for the latest French fashions, particularly her intricate headwear. Isabella is consistently depicted with her hair either covered by a crespinette or caul, often elaborately jeweled, or sometimes with a barbette and fillet, which framed her face tightly. Her gowns in these depictions are typically well-fitted cotehardies, emphasizing a slender silhouette. The very act of commissioning these detailed effigies for tombs or seals for official documents meant that her image, complete with her distinctive fashion choices, was made permanent and visible to many. The artistic representation in these forms provided a clear visual guide for the discerning noblewoman. When a lady saw Isabella's effigy, perhaps in a church, she was presented with an aspirational image of royal elegance. The elaborate headwear, the fitted gowns, the regal posture, all combined to make a powerful statement about contemporary fashion. This visual reinforcement through her public enduring images helped to solidify the trend she favored, making her an enduring fashion influencer. Long after a courtly event had ended, even earlier in the 10th century, the depiction of queens in religious and historical manuscripts, such as the Guerreau Codex, featuring Empress Adelaide, provided important visual cues. While not as detailed as later portraits, these images conveyed the basic shapes and accessories of royal dress. Empress Adelaide, for instance, is depicted in rich, voluminous tunics, often with broad, decorated borders and wearing a crown over a simple veil. These illustrations, though stylized, were invaluable for understanding the imperial aesthetic of the time. The very act of a queen being portrayed in a certain manner in a revered text elevated that style. It made it canonical. When other artists or patrons sought to depict female figures of high status, they would often refer to these established royal images, inadvertently perpetuating the queen's fashion choices. The Liber Vitae of Durham, for example, contains illustrations of Anglo-Saxon queens that, despite their artistic conventions, still convey the essential elements of their royal dress, reinforcing the importance of specific types of brooches, necktorks, and garment drapes. Thus, the royal portrait, whether grand painting or humble manuscript, illumination functioned as a powerful static fashion show, touting the queen's taste and ensuring that her chosen styles transcended the fleeting moment, becoming enduring fashion touchstones across the medieval world. Number 3. Influence on children's and youth fashion. Medieval queens, as mothers and heads of royal households, wielded significant influence over the clothing of their children, particularly their daughters. This might seem like a small detail, but the fashion of royal children often served as a miniature reflection of adult courtly styles adapted for youth. By dressing their offspring in specific ways, queens inadvertently set trends for young noblewomen across the realm, influencing the adoption of certain cuts, fabrics, and accessories that would then filter down to other aristocratic families. One notable example is Philippa of Hainaut, Queen of England in the 14th century. Philippa, mother to a large brood of children, including several daughters, ensured that her girls were dressed impeccably, often mirroring the fashionable Hopland and Cotehardie styles seen in adult courtly circles. While children's clothing in the medieval period was generally simpler than adult attire, royal children were often dressed as miniature adults from a young age. Philippa's daughters, such as Isabella, Countess of Bedford and Joan of England, were seen in public and depicted in family portraits wearing scaled-down versions of the prevailing adult styles, albeit with more practical adaptations for active young lives. The wardrobe accounts of Edward III detail the purchase of fine wools, silks, and even furs for the young princesses' gowns. These were not mere hand-me-downs. They were often tailor-made, reflecting the same attention to detail and fashionable lines as their mother's garments. When noble families visited the court or saw the royal children in processions, they would observe their attire. The sight of the queen's daughters in elegant cotehardies, with fitted bodices and graceful skirts, perhaps even with simple versions of the popular bag sleeves, served as a powerful visual cue. It demonstrated what was considered fashionable and appropriate for young ladies of their status. This direct observation encouraged other aristocratic mothers to dress their own daughters in similar, albeit less opulent styles, ensuring that fashion trends initiated by the queen permeated down to the younger generation of the nobility, bridging the gap between child and adult fashion. Another queen who likely influenced youth fashion, albeit indirectly through her overall impact on court style, was Isabella of Bavaria, Queen of France in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Given her love for elaborate fashion, it is highly probable that her daughters, including Isabella, Queen of England, who herself later influenced English fashion, and Micelle, Duchess of Burgundy, were dressed in equally grand, albeit age-appropriate. While young girls would not have worn full hennins until their late teens. For marriage, the general silhouette of wide, flowing gowns, voluminous sleeves, and rich fabrics, as seen in the Queen's wardrobe, would have been translated into their clothing. Chroniques de Froissart and other court records, while primarily focusing on adult figures, often mention the entire royal family's splendid appearance at events. The daughters of the Queen would have been dressed in luxurious fabrics, like silk and velvet in colors that echoed their mother's preferences. Their gowns would have forgotten simplified but still fashionable elements of the adult houppelande, reinforcing the visual standards set by their mother. This constant visual exposure to the Queen's elaborate tastes meant that younger girls, as they grew, would have naturally aspired to and adopted the styles they saw their mother and older sisters wearing, pushing fashion trends for young ladies towards greater sophistication. Even in earlier periods, the simple fact of a queen dressing her children in fine, well-made versions of contemporary adult garments set a standard. For example, accounts from the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine show her interest in the proper presentation of her children. While children's clothing generally followed adult styles, the Queen's explicit or implicit endorsement of certain cuts or fabrics for her daughters ensured that these styles gained legitimacy. The young princesses would be seen in simpler bliaus or cotehardis, made from good quality linen or fine wool, sometimes with embroidered details. These subtle choices, repeated across generations of royal children, reinforced the idea that young noblewomen should be dressed in a manner that mirrored the current adult fashion, even if simplified. Queen's decision to clothe her children in elegant, up-to-date attire served as a silent instruction to other noble mothers, ensuring that the fashion influence of the crown extended to the very youngest members of aristocratic society, preparing them for a lifetime of courtly elegance. Number 2. The power of accessories and jewelry. Beyond the grandeur of gowns and the height of headwear, medieval queens exerted a profound influence on fashion through their choice and display of accessories and jewelry. These smaller, yet immensely valuable items were often imbued with immense symbolic meaning, reflecting wealth, status, and sometimes even personal allegiance. Queens, with unparalleled access to the finest goldsmiths, jewelers, and exotic materials, could popularize specific types of brooches, belts, necklaces, rings, and other decorative elements that then became coveted by the wider, courtly class. One of the most dazzling examples of a queen shaping trends through jewelry was Elizabeth of Luxembourg, Holy Roman Empress and Queen of Bohemia and Hungary in the early 15th century. Elizabeth possessed an astonishing collection of jewels, which she famously wore with great flair. Her inventories, such as the detailed list of her dowry and personal effects, reveal a treasure trove of gold chains, intricate brooches, fermales, jeweled belts, and elaborate collars. She was particularly influential in popularizing the collar as a prominent piece of neckwear, often adorned with precious stones and enamel work. These collars were sometimes so substantial they resembled a jeweled capelet, or they could be simpler gold chains from which pendants hung. Her preference for such magnificent neck adornments created a new focal point for the female silhouette, drawing attention to the upper body and neckline of her houppelande, or cotehardie. Court painters and illuminators tasked with capturing her regal image frequently depicted her adorned with these magnificent pieces. Other noble women, observing the Empress's lavish use of jewels, began to commission similar collars and heavier necklaces from their own jewelers. This demand fueled the creativity of goldsmiths across Central Europe, leading to a proliferation of increasingly intricate and valuable neckwear. Elizabeth's personal choice elevated jewelry from a mere accessory to a central component of courtly dress, demonstrating the Queen's unique power to transform an item into a widespread fashion phenomenon. Another significant influence came from Philippa of Hainault, Queen of England, in the 14th century through her promotion of jeweled belts and girdles. While belts had always been functional, Philippa's taste for decorative and jeweled girdles, often worn high on the waist of her cotehardis or houppelans, transformed them into essential fashion statements. These girdles were not just simple leather straps. They were often elaborate constructions of gold or silver links, sometimes studded with pearls, gemstones, or enameled plaques. Some were so long that they looped and hung low in front, a fashionable detail that emphasized the flowing lines of the gown. Records from the wardrobe accounts of Edward III frequently list purchases of materials for these luxurious girdles, including gold, silver, and various precious stones. Philippa's consistent display of these opulent belts at courtly events made them a desirable accessory for all high-status women. The visual impact of these sparkling girdles, catching the light and emphasizing the figure, was undeniable. Other noble women, seeing the Queen's preference, began to acquire or commission similar pieces, solidifying the jeweled girdle as a must-have item in the fashionable lady's wardrobe. Her influence extended beyond mere aesthetics. It underscored the importance of every detail, from the grand gown to the seemingly smaller belt, in conveying royal status and up-to-date style. Even earlier, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of France and England in the 12th century, subtly influenced accessory trends through her preference for specific brooches and fibulae. While her garments were often simpler, her brooches were exquisite, often serving as the sole point of significant ornamentation on her outer garments. These fibulae were not just practical clasps. They were miniature works of art, often depicting heraldic animals, religious symbols, or intricate floral designs, made from gold, silver, and set with cabochon stones. Her reliance on these singular striking pieces, rather than an overall scattering of jewels, drew attention to their design and craftsmanship. Her chroniclers, though not detailing her wardrobe, extensively hint at her discerning taste. Other noblewomen, seeing the Queen's choice for elegant focal brooches, would have sought similar well-crafted pieces to adorn their own cloaks and overgowns. The very act of the Queen choosing a specific accessory, a deliberate departure from mere utility, elevated that item to a statement of style, ensuring that even the smallest details of royal dress carried immense weight in dictating the fashion currents of the medieval age. Number 1. The role of fabric and color choice. Beyond cuts and silhouettes, medieval queens profoundly influenced fashion through their deliberate choices in fabrics and colors. In a world where textiles were immensely valuable commodities, a queen's preference for specific materials like silk, velvet, or brocade, or her consistent use of certain colors directly impacted trade, production, and the symbolic language of dress. These choices were often more than mere aesthetics. They conveyed wealth, political alliance, piety, and social standing, setting standards for luxury and taste that rippled through the nobility. One of the most potent examples of a queen shaping fabric trends was Isabella of Castile, Queen of Spain in the late 15th century. Isabella was a fervent patron of luxury textiles, particularly the finest silks, velvets, and brocades. Her court was renowned for its opulence, and Isabella herself was frequently depicted in gowns made from these rich, expensive materials, often woven with intricate patterns in gold and silver thread. Her wardrobe accounts are replete with entries for large quantities of crimson velvet, cloth of gold, and Florentine brocade. Her consistent demand for such high-quality imported fabrics stimulated trade routes and encouraged local weavers to attempt to emulate the luxurious textures and complex patterns. The very act of the queen choosing a specific type of velvet or a particular brocade pattern instantly elevated that fabric to the height of fashion. Other noblewomen, desperate to emulate the queen's grandeur, would then seek out similar materials, creating a robust market for these luxury textiles. Her choice of vibrant colors, especially deep crimson, a very expensive dye at the time, and lustrous purple, reinforced their status as regal and exclusive. The visual impact of Isabella in a gown of crimson velvet or gold brocade was unmistakable. It conveyed immense power and wealth, associating these specific fabrics directly with royal authority and the pinnacle of sartorial excellence. Another queen who dictated fabric trends was Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of France and England in the 12th century. While later queens might have focused on heavier velvets, Eleanor lived in an era when fine silks and lighter flowing fabrics were gaining prominence. She embraced the use of samite, sandal, and cisclatum types of silk fabrics that were often imported from Byzantium or the Islamic world and were incredibly expensive. Her preference for these lighter, more supple silks, which draped beautifully and lent themselves to graceful movement, contrasted with the heavier wools and linens that were more common. Chroniclers of her life, such as Ralph of Dis, often alluded to her elegant and sometimes exotic tastes, which certainly extended to her choice of materials. Her adoption of these particular silks helped to popularize them among the aristocracy of both France and England. Queens and noblewomen who followed her lead sought out similar fine silks, appreciating their luxurious feel and elegant drape. This demand ensured that these specific types of silk fabrics became highly desirable, influencing tailors to design gowns that showcased the flowing nature of these materials, thus shifting the overall aesthetic towards greater elegance. Furthermore, queens used color to express specific messages, or simply to set a trend. Blanche of Castile, Queen of France in the 13th century, often favored deep azure blue for her gowns. This color, derived from the expensive lapis lazuli pigment, was associated with purity, loyalty, and the Virgin Mary, aligning perfectly with Blanche's pious image. Her consistent choice of azure blue for her ceremonial robes and formal dresses, as seen in her famous moralized Bible portraits, made the color a hallmark of French royalty and a symbol of virtue. Other noblewomen, particularly those wishing to express their piety or their loyalty to the crown, began to adopt azure blue for their own gowns, recognizing its symbolic power and its association with the esteemed queen. Similarly, the consistent royal use of purple throughout the medieval period, from empresses of the Holy Roman Empire like Theophanu to later queens of England, solidified its status as the ultimate color of royalty due to its historical rarity. While purple was not a unique invention of any single queen, their consistent and exclusive use of garments dyed with Tyrian purple or other rare purple dye re-anchored the aspirational color of ultimate power and luxury. Through their commanding presence and the sheer opulence of their choices, queens transformed fabrics and colors from mere materials into powerful fashion statements, dictating not just what was worn, but what it meant to be truly regal and fashionable.